So when I'm servicing brakes on motorbikes, cars as well actually, first thing I usually do is take the pads out, and on these Brembo calipers there's a pin just there, and you probably won't be able to see it particularly well, but it's got a little split pin in it the other side, holding it in place. Actually I can see it better by getting at it through the wheel from this side. I'm just going to slide that up. That is tiny, so that's going to go in the magnetic parts tray before I lose it. I'm just going to tap the pin through from the other side. So that's loose now. If a little bit claggy. Hopefully the pads will now come out. It shouldn't be this tight to get out, but that's because they've been stuck there for a long time. So those pads, aside from being very old, I don't know if you can see, they're actually alright. They've got plenty left on them, so it may just be that these brakes need lubricating and putting back together. I'll have a bit more of an idea when I've taken the caliper off. That one's alright as well. I'm just looking at these to see if I will be able to tell which is inner and which is outer when I put them back. Not sure, so I'm going to label them. Next step's to take the caliper off. It's usually quite tight, so I've got it's a 12 socket using a 6-point socket on a short breaker bar. Not too bad. That one's a bit more stuck. There we go. That's interesting. Looks like these have been off before. Got some copper grease on. An encouraging sign of careful maintenance, I guess, in the past. So what I'm going to do is give that a clean up with some brake cleaner and a brush, and then first thing I'm probably just going to do is very gently squeeze the there's a braking spider in there. Don't know whether you can see him, just crawling out the way. Give it a clean. I'm not going to clean the spider, I'm going to invite him to leave first of all. Check that both pistons are moving when you squeeze the brake lever. Now only squeeze it a very little bit, because if you keep squeezing the pistons will come out and then you've created a load of extra work for yourself potentially that you didn't need. Also an opportunity while we're here to check the brake line very carefully. So bend it, check it's not perishing. You need to do that all the way up, so I need to take this cowl off. Really good spray with brake cleaner, plastic brushes, plastic bristle brushes at least. Paying particular attention to the channels where the pads sit, because that's what's going to stop the caliper, and well, to stop the pads backing off the disc, so make things bind up. Back to the old favourite toothbrush to get into some of the difficult to reach areas. Also cleaning really well around the piston, because in a few minutes I'm going to push the piston back in, or at least I'm going to attempt to now. I'm pretty sure they're going to move. I said much earlier on in this whole project that I thought that this caliper was probably going to need a rebuild, but actually I think it doesn't. I think they're going to slide alright, based on me just pressing them back a little bit with my fingers before. Okay, I'm happy with that. I know there's still bits of muck on it, but I think I've said a couple of times now, we're going for function rather than show bike. Just let that dry. So carrying on putting the brakes back together, the next thing to do is do something about these pads. They've got loads of corrosion on the surfaces where they slide into the caliper, and that will stop them sliding. So I'm just going to give them a very, very light file. Just to clean those up. Bit of corrosion on the backing plate, but I think that will be okay. I'd rather not file all that. Okay. Same for the other one. I may also give them a special treat and take the cobwebs off. How about that? Okay. So I changed my mind. I am going to give the pads, the back of the pads, a little bit of a going over. Just to take the loose paint off. There you go. Putting them like this so I remember which one went inside and which one went outside. Okay. Next thing to do is try and squeeze the pistons back in. Got a little bit of carpet to stop me damaging the caliper. And of course when you squeeze one in, the other one comes out. Well, we'll see if that's enough to get them back on. They've gone back in a little bit, so we'll see if that's enough to get the pads back in. So just put the caliper bolts back on loosely for now. A small amount of copper grease down this edge, being very careful not to get it onto the pad. And on the back you can see the impression of where the piston has been before. Okay, so I've tried moving the pistons in the caliper. Don't know how you can see that. They both move under hand pressure, but the problem is when you push one in, the other comes out. So I've tried a few different things, but what I think I'm going to need to do is drain some fluid off. So just loosen the bleed screw first. That was easier than I thought. I was just using a socket to do it because I didn't want to chew it if I had to lean on it really hard, but that's actually loose, so I can downgrade to a spanner now. It's 8mm. I'm hoping that just giving the fluid somewhere to go oh, that fluid looks horrible. But I knew it would, that's why we're going to change it. That's what's coming next. Yeah, that's much easier actually. Just catch the fluid. Yeah, they're going back nicely now. Try and close the bleed nipple again before the fluid is sucked back in along with some air. Okay. We've got those pistons pushed back in. Before I thought I was going to have to rebuild this caliper, but actually having done that they're sliding really easily, so that is good news. Let's get a rag to catch this brake fluid in the end of this tube so it doesn't flip all over the bodywork. Turn that way to remove that. Not much fluid in there, in the tube I mean. The fluid that's come out, even in that little container there, you can see it's brown. That's horrible. That's not how brake fluid should look, so we're going to be changing that. So I'll leave the dust cover off. Now that I've got the pistons back, I can actually assemble the pads onto the caliper first before I put it in. What I'm doing here is just cleaning up the pin for the pads with some brake cleaner. Just giving it a little sand with that sanding sponge just to get the surface rust off so that it goes back together more easily. Tiny bit of copper grease. Put the outer pad in. And then watch it fall out again. Well done, Andrew, that was first class. A little bit of copper grease on these bolts as well. Yeah, 12. Okay, that caliper, that pad pin, sorry, it's got a little spring on it, so just needs gentle encouragement to get it through. So on the back side of the pad retaining pin, there is a tiny little spring. It looks like that. You're not really going to be able to see me putting that on, but that just slides on. Use a small screwdriver to press it into place. That's fine. That's on. Torque setting for these caliper bolts is 23. Okay, so now for bleeding, or changing I should say, the brake fluid. I've had these master cylinder reservoir screws soaking in a bit of WD-40 just to hopefully make them easier to remove. I've turned the handlebars slightly to make the reservoir near upright as I can. That's not looking good. Just wondering if my impact driver's got a small enough Phillips socket, to which it has. I don't really like the idea of hammering onto this, but I also don't like the idea of having to drill them out. Quite pleased that worked. I wouldn't mind betting these haven't been removed since the bike was made. That fluid looks so horrible that I wouldn't be at all surprised. Put that little cap to the side somewhere where it can't get dusty, and have a look at that. Don't know how well you can see it, but there you go. Hideous. Anyway, let's get changing it. Okay, so time for some new brake fluid. Just a standard fresh container of .4 there. You don't really need a 500ml, a 250 would be more than enough. So just top it up as close as you can to the top. I've got a rag there just in case any spills. try not to wobble the steering too much when the reservoir is this full, because you could, well, spill some. Put the lid back on the container in between your fills so that no bits get into it, and also, although it's only a limited time, just reduces the moisture vapour, the water vapour that gets on it as well. So for bleeding these brakes, originally I was going to use the Mighty vacuum pump, but the problem you quite often have is that if you don't get a good seal with the tube around the bleed nipple, then you just suck air, all the vacuum goes on sucking air around the threads and the tube seal on the bleed nipple rather than actually sucking brake fluid out. So I'm just going to go for a good old gravity method here, which, as the name suggests, involves allowing gravity to do its thing. The tube on the bleed nipple, open it up, and hopefully you can see some fluid making some very slow progress out of that tube. Always make sure you've got a bit of tube going up before it goes down. That way you've got a column of fluid, so that if for any reason you squeeze the lever and you let it off, then fluid will be drawn back in, not air. Okay, so we'll just leave that to do its thing for a little while. Keep the reservoir topped up. At this point it looks like nothing's happening, but what's actually happening is that the fluid is flowing down very slowly into the reservoir, and you can tell that's happening because the master cylinder level goes down. So there's what we've drained so far. I think you'll agree that looks pretty nasty for brake fluid. It's supposed to be a sort of a straw colour, much lighter than that anyway, so this was a job well worth doing. Got a bit more to go. So if you want, while this is happening, with an appropriately soft hammer, you can just tap the caliper gently, just to dislodge any air bubbles. I haven't found that method particularly effective on motorcycles, but that didn't stop me giving it a go. Anyway, just mopping up a bit of fluid that came out around the outside of the bleed screw there. So if you want, while you're doing this, you can, it's more relevant to bleeding than just changing the fluid. You can squeeze the lever. As you squeeze the lever, fluid will come this way, and then some of the fluid will be sucked back, but not more than this column of fluid here, so you're not going to compromise your brake system by getting any air in it. So here we go, you see more comes out, and then you let it back, and a little bit is sucked back, but not enough to actually let any air in. So do that a few times. Can just be helpful to force. In this case, a whole load of debris by the look of it. Maybe that was the hammering, maybe it did do something. So the final, I suppose, method that I tend to use is that you can squeeze the lever and then hold it squeezed while you then do the bleed screw back up. I'm just finding where the closed point is, because what you then do is close it when you let go of the lever, so that more fluid is only sucked in from the reservoir rather than back from the tube. So open, squeeze it through, close, let go, open, squeeze it through, close, let go of the lever, open, squeeze it through, close, let go. Check at this point how much fluid we've got left. Yeah, we're doing alright. Open, squeeze the lever, close, let go of the lever, open, squeeze the lever, close, let go of the lever. You get the idea. Keep going like that. I'm going to keep going with this for a little while because I seem to be getting some debris coming out of the bleed screw, which is rather worrying. Maybe that hammering wasn't such a good idea. Okay, I'm happy with that. You can keep going with this for an awful long time, but really I think that's sufficient. Doesn't seem to be any more debris coming out now. Definitely no air bubbles coming out. Just check the level in the master cylinder reservoir because you don't want it too high, because otherwise when you put the rubber cap on you will squirt brake fluid out everywhere. That's just to the top of the sight glass on the master cylinder, so I think that's about right. We'll tighten that up. At this point I'm going to put the vacuum pump back on and just put a bit of suction on there so that when I take this out, the brake fluid, he says, doesn't go everywhere. Some of it doesn't go everywhere. So before you put the top on, just squeeze, make sure your bleed nipple's closed, which this is, then squeeze the lever to see how it feels, and also to seat the pads against the disc, because we pushed the pads back quite a long, the pistons, excuse me, back quite a long way. So we could end up using up quite a lot of fluid to push those pistons back to where we need them to be. In this case, hasn't really gone down much at all. The fluid's still to the top of the sight glass window on the side there. I've cleaned this up with some brake cleaner. Also cleaned the threads of the screws and put a bit of copper grease on them. Just so that hopefully we don't have to break out the impact driver when we're doing the brake fluid change next time. Just tighten these down a little at a time. And that's it. That's the brake fluid change done.